Focus doing. Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're doing it. We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team.
I would be very careful about slinging stuff.
Am I going to get sued?
We got legal on this?
Let's send you out on the right note. PFF sucks. Have a great day, everybody.
Wow.
Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube. I'm coming at you from Nashville, Sam, because we've got Seahawks-Titans practice down here, so I'm trying to take it all in.
I like it. Live on location.
Kind of. From my friend's guest room.
Right. Not the location of actual training camp, but, you know, somewhere in the greater Nashville vicinity.
That's right. And then I'm going straight to practice. We're going to go right to practice, check out Seahawks-Titans. Big show here today, though. We're going to be breaking down all of the highest paid players in the NFL. There's an article over at PFF.com listing everybody out by position. We're going to go through that list, talk out the guys that, you know, kind of make sense and maybe some of the surprises there. But a lot of news over the last couple days that we have to touch on. J.J. McCarthy going to be out for the season, the rookie quarterback from the Minnesota Vikings. Matthew Judon has been traded from the New England Patriots to the Atlanta Falcons for a third-round pick. Let's start with J.J. McCarthy, Sam. We broke down his performance on Monday. Really impressive debut for the first-rounder, and very disappointing now that we're not going to be able to see him at all this season.
Yeah, real bummer. I mean, we were talking about his encouraging preseason performance, even with that interception to Jack Jones from the Raiders. You know, he looked good. He looked controlled in the pocket. Somebody on Twitter, on X, was making the point of, well, he only looked good, you know, against the Raiders' backup defensive backs. And, you know, there's some truth to that. But a lot of what we were talking about was how comfortable in the pocket he was looking, his movement within the pocket, his ability to sort of work through the offense and adjust. And as much as he was going against backup defensive backs, he was also working with the second string offense, both in terms of receivers and offensive line. So, you know, and again, it's preseason, right? It's an encouraging debut, which isn't to say he's amazing, he's here, the next Patrick Mahomes is in the building. It was an encouraging start, and we were saying, you know, maybe he'll be ready sooner rather than later to take that starting job from Sam Darnold. And in the space of 24 hours or whatever it was, it's like, actually, JJ's experiencing some sore knee issues. They're gonna check him out. They checked him out. He's gonna have a scope just to see what the deal is. And then the scope was like, this is either a 4-week injury or a 4-month injury, and it was the latter. They've elected for a complete surgical repair of his meniscus, which is not to say necessarily that the injury was worse than they thought it was, but it's just that's the best way to completely fix it. But it does mean that it shuts him down for his rookie season, and the first we'll see him is year 2.
As a son of doctors, did that result surprise you, Sam?
No, because I had heard previously that it was a sort of either-or situation. You know, they were going to go in there, see what they were dealing with, and then depending on what they choose to do in terms of fixing it, that's the timeline, right? It was either going to be this sort of quick fix, effectively, which would get him ready for the start of the season or a little bit beyond, or it would be, no, let's fix this properly, but that does mean shutting him down for the year.
Man, a tough blow for the Vikings, right? They were trying to turn the page, get onto the next point, next part of, you know, where the organization wanted to go, moving on from Kirk Cousins. It was a bit of a transition year because I think, you know, we don't know when we would have seen J.J. McCarthy on the field. But it's year 3 of Kevin O'Connell and year 3 of Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, you know, the regime that's come in to turn things around. And now, it doesn't mean that J.J. McCarthy would have been better than Sam Darnold this year. I don't know what would have happened there, but it just, you know, hurts his development most likely, right, by sitting and having to rehab the entire season. So it just kind of pushes things back a year, I think, as you're the Vikings and trying to get the whole organization back on track, in addition to everything else that's happened to them throughout the offseason.
Yeah, I think it's just a shame for everybody. You know, whether or not he was going to start day one, he was going to be a big part of this team this season. You know, he wasn't going to last very long on the bench. And instead, we're just not going to see him at all until next year. So it's a real shame for the Vikings. But it does now mean that we're going to get – you should love this, right? Other than poor guy's injured his knee and he's going to get recovered. But this is like – This is like Steve Catnip. We're going to get Sam Darnold data points for a whole year.
Yes.
We're going to get a whole year of them.
That whole joke started with Nick Foles, right? Because Nick Foles had two of the biggest outlier data points, winning the Super Bowl in that 2-game stretch that was out of this world, the 2013 season where he had 27 touchdowns, 2 picks, and was great. And everything other than that was like, oh, he got hurt, or he didn't get to start, or I was like, I just wanted more Nick Foles data points. And we have Sam Darnold data points. You're right. Because, look, there's a lot of people online, friends of the show, Mina Kimes or Nate Tice, who have...
There's a hive.
There is a Sam Darnold hive. Absolutely. And I think we've been pretty honest about it. Look, he's had stretches of play, 3 to 5 game samples that have been intriguing, but hasn't really been consistent beyond that. And I liked Sam Darnold coming out of college. I thought he had a lot of traits that would translate to the NFL. It just has not been there in any kind of consistent fashion during his career.
It was interesting, actually. The last few days has sort of opened my eyes to how prevalent this Sam Darnold hive actually is amongst the sort of football watching community. I thought, maybe there was a couple of people here or there, but actually, I mean, Mina, I believe in her show, talked about it as like a sleeper cell. The sleeper cell has been activated and all these guys are coming out of the woodwork, and there's actually millions of them. You look, Sam Darnold stands are now everywhere. I had no idea that they were so widespread and out there.
Well, the good news is they'll either be proven right or this thing will be put to bed because, look, Minnesota is still in a decent spot. I don't know how Jordan Addison, was injured at practice yesterday. I don't know how serious that is, but you're still looking at a team that has a solid offensive line. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson will be back at some point. Good group of playmakers. Aaron Jones in the backfield, probably upgrading their run game for the first time in a couple of years here. So they have all the pieces around Sam Darnold, and we do have this world that's been fun to watch the last couple of years of Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield and some of these former high draft picks coming good later in their career. And I know that doesn't mean it's going to happen again, but that part will at least be fun to watch. Sam Darnold data points. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, I mean, so the one sort of thing, it is fair to say that Sam Darnold has generally not had a particularly good situation to work with, right? In terms of coaching, generally in terms of supporting cast. Like it's not all been sunshine and roses for Sam Darnold in the NFL in terms of the situation that's been around him. So from that perspective, this probably is the best situation that he's had to work with. Kevin O'Connell is obviously a very good coach. The system is a very good system. It is, one of the Sean McVay, Shanahan offshoot branches. And assuming Jordan Addison is there for most of the year, if Hawkinson comes back, there's a few ifs and question marks with that offensive personnel, but generally speaking, that should be a very good group of offensive personnel. So if you are, a Sam Darnold sleeper agent, you would be saying, look, he's never had it this good, right? This is the time we get to see it. But it does mean that if we don't see it this year, it's probably not there.
All right, before we get on to the Matthew Judon trade, as a busy parent, you want to give your kids a head start in their financial future, but investing can often be both confusing and time-consuming. Well, Fabric by Gerber Life makes it easy for you to set up an investment account for your child that grows with them and helps prepare for their financial future. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a UGMA account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. UGMA stands for Uniform Gifts to Minors Act. So while your kids can invest when they're minors, a UGMA account allows you to invest on their behalf and gives their investments more time to grow. So join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. MEETfabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolio is managed by Ford Washington Investment Advisors, Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Monthly minimum contribution required. Learn more at meetfabric.com. All right, Sam, the other news was Matthew Judon being traded from the New England Patriots to the Atlanta Falcons. Judon had been unhappy with his contract. He's 32 years old. Last year of his deal, he's been a very productive player for the Patriots, very well liked within the locker room. And, look, I got something else to say about New England later and what's happening at practice or what happened at practice this week. But it's kind of a good fit. Judon for a third-round pick. I think New England doesn't look like they're going to be competitive. Again, I'll get to that in a minute. In Atlanta, when you start stacking up edge rush rooms, if they had a room, they're near the bottom, right? They don't have, they have Lorenzo Carter, Arnold Ebiketie, guys that, they're okay starters. They're okay high-end backups, third pass rushers, but nobody that really can make an impact off the edge. So Atlanta making an aggressive move here, giving up that third rounder for Judon.
Yeah, a third rounder is quite a lot, particularly when there is no new deal in place. This is doesn't seem to be a Montez Sweat deal where they've got, the next contract ready to go. They sign him with the idea that immediately they're going to give him the extension. He's a part of the team. They're bringing him in. I mean, I don't want to compare it to the Hassan Reddick thing because that's been a complete train wreck for the Jets so far. But it's that style of thing. Like, they brought him in, and the reports are there are no sort of plans right now to give him this new contract, and maybe they'll adjust some money or whatever, but they're not signing him long term, at which point a third round draft pick for a 32-year-old edge rusher who's good but not great, like definitely upgrades what they have, but is not like a one-man fix to an ailing pass rush. It's quite a lot of draft capital. Like, it's a pretty high pick to give up.
32 years old today, actually, Matthew Judon's
happy birthday, Matthew.
Today. So happy birthday to Matthew Judon. He is, look, again, if you've listened to the PFF NFL podcast over the last 10 years, forgive me if I've said things like this before, but Judon is one of those guys who has the sack totals higher than the down-to-down PFF pass rush production. So over the course of his career, just looking at his pass rush grade, it's good. It's a good, solid pass rush grade. It's in the 70s. It's 59th percentile among edge rushers since entering the league in 2016. 59th percentile. That's fine, but his sack percentage is 96th percentile. So either he's that guy who is really good at finishing, has a high percentage of those cleanup sacks, those plays that, again, they probably need a little bit of help from the offense. They need the quarterback to hold the ball a little bit longer. They need someone else to create a pressure, and then you're just kind of cleaning it up. So the sack percentage is really high, but the down-to-down dominant pass rushes are slightly above average across the rest of the league. So that's just something to keep in mind. Again, I think the grade does a better job of showing the player value, and that also could be part of the disconnect where there's a lot of, like, again, everybody in New England's like, hey, Judon's been the best player on the defense the last few years, and Judon's like, I got all these sacks, extend my contract. But I think the reality is he's more of like a top 32 pass rusher than a top 10 pass rusher.
And the interesting thing is those sacks, like the sort of falling into that category of like the high sack rate guy, really only happened in a couple of years of his career. Like, generally speaking, he was just a solid pass rusher who got a decent amount of pressure, a decent number of sacks, but wasn't lighting everything on fire. And then we had the first 10 sack season in Baltimore, and then we had those 2 years in New England where he, pushed it deep into the teens and was one of the sort of best sack artists in the NFL. But if you just roll up his entire career, it's all kind of pulled up by those individual seasons. It wasn't like he wasn't one of these guys that every year had way more sacks than had a disproportionate volume of sacks to pressure and to pass rushing grade and stuff. It was like it just spiked for a couple of years, and that's pulled his entire career averages up. And if you look at percentiles for all of his stuff for his entire career, basically everything is 50 to 60%, somewhere in there, and then sack rate is the 96th percentile because of those two seasons, essentially.
One other thing I'll add here, again, Judon started his career with the Ravens. He was in that Ravens hybrid 3-4 scheme for years where you've got outside backers that drop into coverage a lot. He would drop into a coverage over 100 times per season as a starter with the Ravens. Now, he hasn't done that since 2020. 2021 with the Patriots, dropped into coverage 94 times. That dropped a lot last year, but he was hurt, so that's why. But he's always been a guy 75 to 130 times a year. He's a coverage player. You don't see that from like the Boses of the world, right? So this is the old school 3-4 outside backer type, and now you're going to Raheem Morris's scheme where they like that versatility. You need somebody on the edge that can drop into coverage a little bit. Lorenzo Carter, I think, can do it a touch. But I think there's a scheme fit here with Atlanta as well, with the versatility of Judon will fit well. I think for me, the bottom line, though, for New England, it's a good move. They are getting a third-round pick back here. For Atlanta, I mean, look, they're being aggressive, but from New England's perspective, Sam, I've never seen a practice report like what came out the other day for the Patriots. They got sacked, per our friend Phil Perry, 15 times on 42 dropbacks against the Eagles. 15 times. And someone else reported it was only 14, but that was like a fumbled snap or something like that. So only 14 times on 41 dropbacks. I have never heard anything like that. That if that was a real game, that would be like breaking the sack record times 4 if you projected that over the season. That was between Drake May and Jacoby Brissett. It seems like there's some serious issues in New England. So between the offensive line, it's just not a great roster, new coaching staff, Drake May's probably not ready and not in the best position. I don't think New England's going to be competitive. 3 other teams in their division look really good. So this is a good move for the Patriots to say, hey, we're probably not going to win a whole lot of games this year. Let's absolutely take a 3rd-round pick for a 32-year-old edge rusher in the last year of his deal.
Yeah, and to be clear, that's sack rate. I mean, a high pressure rate in a game is around 40%. That's a sack rate of 34%. That's
sacked 15 times. I had to text Phil. I'm like, is this real? Like you miscounted. You absolutely miscounted. Right. But the Eagles, maybe they're the 85 Bears. Nolan Smith and Josh Sweat and Jalen Carter, maybe they were unblockable. And it sounded like it was because of the offensive line. There was miscommunication. The QBs, like Brissett's never been great from a sack rate perspective. So those are insane numbers. And I'm not trying to, overrate one practice, but that's not a good sign for New England going into the season.
No, not at all. I mean, I feel like the deal is ultimately it's win-win, right? It's a good deal for New England because you're right. They're probably not going to be good this year. Cash in on a 3rd-round pick for a guy that isn't going to be there long-term is something of a malcontent in that he's unhappy with his contract right now. Maybe he wouldn't have caused problems the way some other players are, but still, things aren't great between you and Matthew Judon, and if he's only going to be there this year, you might as well cash in that chip while there's an offer on the table. And then for Atlanta, okay, we said they gave up a lot. Theoretically, they're going to be good this year, so it should be a low 3rd-round draft pick. And he does, make a massive difference to what would have been maybe the worst edge rusher situation in the NFL. There's a couple of rough ones that are there, the couple of rough ones that are there to compete with that. But that's a bad situation in terms of generating pressure on the edge. Judon absolutely moves that forward in a fairly significant way. And, we said, look, one of the costs of spending that draft pick on Michael Penix Jr. at the top of the 1st round is you didn't have that pick to then spend on defensive players, which is the biggest area of weakness on this team on paper. They were hoping a guy like Braylon Trice could come in. Like Braylon Trice is down already, so it's kind of cashing in, a year early, using that 3rd-rounder, bringing it in now, and making sure that there's at least somebody on that edge rusher spot to generate some heat.
All right, man. I think I want to get to this highest paid player article in just a minute here. A couple programming notes, what's happening over the next 7 or 8 days here. Of course, we announced just last week at this time, we're moving on to the 33rd team, new show called Check the Mic. We encourage everybody, all the feeds are live for Check the Mic. If you could go over there, subscribe if you want to join us on the new show. We're going to have our final show here at PFF on Wednesday. So I know there's been some little bit of confusion, right? We announced it, but we're still here.
Yep.
And we're going to be breaking down all the preseason action on Monday morning, as we always do. And then next Wednesday, August 21st, that'll be our last show with PFF. And I'm kind of excited about the show itself, Sam, just because I want to pay my respects to the people that helped get us here in this career, the ability to make a career move, the people that have built PFF, the fans that have joined with us through the years, and do a proper handoff to Trevor Sikkema and the rest of the guys at PFF. They're going to be taking this feed going forward.
Yeah, and we have generally some awesome fans. I mean, we've been sent all kinds of comedy stuff down the years. There's a booster seat sitting over there that we've had from one of our listeners, and the gifts have kept coming in since we've announced that we are leaving. A guy in the chat, we've never understood how to say this guy's name, so I'm going to butcher it again, but Mojal, you'll recognize him from the YouTube chat if you're a regular in there, but he has sent us multiple gifts. One of which I'm not going to open now because it's like wrapped up with a lot of tape and that would be a pain. But he has sent us a gift saying, I have on this show repeatedly made claim to being 5'11", and he has gifted us an expandable ruler to prove this on our last show. So
nice.
It sounds like our last show is going to involve measuring me at some point.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll have to. We'll have to prove it out.
That's going to be rough if it turns out I'm only 5'6".
I mean, my mom recently compared you to my 5'5" teammate from high school.
If I'm wrong, everyone else is lying as well, because there are people that claim to be like 5'9" that I'm, a couple of inches taller than. So we might have to recalibrate all of humanity if I'm significantly off.
We'll have to take a poll, see if this is like Renner running a 4.6 a couple years ago.
I know, right?
we need to flashback to that. That was another great PFF moment.
So one other note about the new feeds. Check the mic. You'll find them on my pinned tweet at PFF_Sam, which will obviously be changing at some point in the switch over as well. There is content up on the new feeds, whether it's YouTube, whether it's our RSS. It will not be regular scheduled programming content until the switchover happens. So when we actually leave PFF, we will have our new shows that will look a lot like our regular PFF shows. They'll be the length that you all anticipate and expect, our 2-hour marathon preview shows about various things, the upcoming season, and of course the review shows once NFL football starts happening. So do not be dismayed at the current length of whatever's on that feed. It is to tide us over until the real stuff starts.
And one thing I think we're gonna continue to do is believe in PFF and the grading and the data. I mean, that it's a big part of our analysis, Sam, and it will be going forward. And it should be for you, because the 2024 football season, it's coming. It's here. But you can get ahead of every game with PFF. And we have a special promo code for you. It's NFL Show 25. So you can get 25% off your PFF Plus annual subscription. You gain access to insights and tools trusted by all 32 NFL teams and every major college team. Don't forget them as well. Dominate your fantasy league. Get your roster. You get your roster of PFF's. Dominate your fantasy league and your roster with PFF's fantasy mock draft simulator, the draft rankings, live draft assistant, and in-season tools. Of course, there's people like Nathan Yankee putting out their rankings that are award-winning. You can't get them anywhere else except with PFF Plus. You can get premium stats for players, teams, and matchups from the NFL and college football. You can use best bets to find an edge in your player props and parlays. There is something for every hardcore football fan. So for more, you go to subscribe.pff.com. That's subscribe.pff.com. Use the code NFLShow25 at checkout. All right, Sam, this article by, was it Zoltan?
It was Zoltan.
I want to give Zoltan a shout out as well. He sent me a very nice note.
Same.
The other day about, just like a memory that I hadn't even remembered it, but it was something to the effect of like, he was like waking up to review a game. And I was like, this throws a 0.5. This one's a 1. I was like pre-grading it for him to make sure he didn't screw it up. And he appreciated that I was giving him, make sure you don't call this a big time throw because this, and this. I just thought it was funny, some of the memories that some of the other people around PFF have that you don't maybe remember.
He sent me one as well. He had found what I assume was our first interaction on Twitter, a tweet thread from 2014, where he had posted an article that he wrote, and I was asking him whether, because Zoltan, for anybody that doesn't know, is from Hungary, and his English is ridiculous. Like, it's better than mine as a Hungarian. And for anyone that doesn't know, Hungarian is one of those languages that like exists in its own weird little isolated thing that doesn't have, like, it's not like a Latin language where it all traces back to the one. It's a very unusual language, and Zoltan's English is incredibly good for somebody who's it's not only his second language, but his first language is Hungarian. So anyway, I was asking him whether English was his first language during this article, and said something to that effect, like his English is incredible for that. And this was one of our first interactions, and he was saying that it motivated him to kind of keep going, and he ends up getting into PFF, was such a positive force for the company that like we had to sort of bend or create employment rules for Zoltan, right? Because we had like an American company, a UK company, and then Zoltan on his own in Hungary, which would be a giant pain in the ass normally to accommodate. But Zoltan's such an important part of PFF that PFF made it happen.
Yeah, so other stories and people that I'd like to honor and pay respects to, next Wednesday on our August 21st show. I mean, we're not going to be able to list everybody, but stories like that are a lot of fun. I think our listeners are going to enjoy hearing about some of the people behind the scenes, the people I've called the Ernie Adams of PFF, or, the people that do stuff that maybe their name isn't as known, but have been absolute warriors, pushing this thing forward and just great coworkers and teammates through the years. So looking forward to that next Wednesday. All right, man, you want to go through this? Zoltan wrote it.
Yeah.
Again, he's just kind of listing out the top 10 players by position from an APY standpoint or AAV standpoint, average annual value. Let's start with quarterback. Joe Burrow's number one at $55 million per year. And we see all those recent contracts: Trevor Lawrence, Jordan Love, Tua, Jared Goff. It's basically, did you sign a contract this offseason?
Yeah.
You're now in the top 5 in APY.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of interesting things about this as a concept. Number one is obviously looking at the guys on the list, and we can talk about those. But I think it's also interesting to sort of, okay, now we know what the salary cap is. Like, what percentage of the cap are we talking about for each one of these positions? So the top end, in fact, so this top 10 effectively spans 18 to 21.5% of the salary cap, right? That's what you are giving up or allocating to your quarterback if you're paying him a high-end, top-of-the-market money. And then obviously if Dak Prescott comes along and blows that out of the water with a deal that starts with a 6, we're going to be talking about an even higher level than that, 23.5 type of percent. So we're talking about a fifth to a quarter of your salary cap is going to end up getting chewed up by your franchise quarterback pretty soon.
I mean, the other thing that stands out to me is that number 10 is Deshaun Watson at $46 million per year, and we're 2 years removed from that looking like an insane number, in part because it was fully guaranteed.
Right.
But this is what teams are anticipating, right? It's like, pay the guy. It might sound crazy now, but 2 years from now, it won't.
Yeah. Critically, like, who are the names that are not on that list, right? Patrick Mahomes, who signed the $500 million deal, the first $500 million contract in all of sports, nowhere to be seen. Josh Allen, who signed a much more conventional contract, but a top-of-the-market contract at the time, no longer even in the top 10. Like, this is how quickly these contracts move on, and what are seen as massive deals at the time become relative bargains. Now, the complicating factor is obviously once that happens, players start to agitate for renegotiation and a redo of those deals. So it's not as simple necessarily as saying, well, you get them done, the sooner you can get them done, the better, because then you sign him to a team-friendly deal, and then it's just like profit from that moment on. Because players recognize that, and agents recognize that, and they come back to the table and they say, okay, this deal is no longer reflective. They try and have their cake and eat it. And that happens at other positions, not necessarily happen too much at the quarterback spot with the deals we're talking about. But like Tyreek Hill, for example, just got a redo, right? Because all the deals had moved on. Tyreek Hill's previous top-of-the-market deal was no longer top of the market, so he came back to the table. So you can definitely get ahead of these contracts and get a cheap deal a couple of years down the line, but you can't guarantee that it's going to stay that way.
Also shows the value of the rookie contract quarterback. I mean,
yeah.
we've said this.
I mean, cost control is huge.
I mean, that the difference in the high end guys and the rookie contracts just keeps widening, and so it's not that you're looking for just average quarterback play on a rookie contract, but if you do have an extra $40 million to spend, and and look, I've said before, there's a lot of mid-tier quarterbacks, right? The difference between QB 8 and QB 22, I don't know if it's drastic in today's NFL.
So,
but if your mid-tier quarterback is making a fraction of what the high-end guys are making, you can grab another $20 million player or two to help support him.
I mean, we've said this before. I believe the single most valuable contract in all of the NFL is Brock Purdy's, right? Because not only is it a good quarterback on a rookie contract, it's literally the lowest possible rookie contract because it was the last pick of the draft, which is a better contract than the deals you often have to sign priority free agents to, right. And those guys can come back to the table sooner. So, for example, let's say the average salary cap percentage for this top 10 is 20% of your salary cap, right? $50 million a year, it's 20%-ish. The deal that Brock Purdy is on, it's a 4-year, $3-point-something million deal. So Brock Purdy, not 20%, Brock Purdy is accounting for 0.35% of the 49ers salary cap.
It's crazy. I mean, now they have, but next year at this time, he's going to be in the 60s.
Yes.
I think. I mean, unless things fall apart this
Right.
year, he's probably in the 60s, and Dak is probably in the 60s, and I assume Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes will have some sort of restructure at some point that just makes it look more respectable. That's why a guy like Matthew Stafford, who's not close to the top 10, it's like rumblings about him not loving his contract, coming into the season, because this stuff moves quickly, and it's not necessarily merit based. It's timing based. It's based off when did you sign your last contract, which is also interesting in how Dak has played this, right? And how Kirk Cousins has played this. Those guys have valued 3-year contracts that get them to free agency. Again, 3 and 4 year contracts, where Mahomes and Allen are like, nope, face of the franchise, give me the 10-year deal. I'm here forever, and we'll work on the money as we go. A lot of those, the Daks and the Cousins of the world, keep figuring out how to maximize their value every 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, but I think it also shows that it's not easy from a team perspective, right? There's not necessarily a correct answer to this, because you would say, look, from the team perspective, going the Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes direction is absolutely the right course, right? Get in there early, get the deal done. It'll look high at the time, but after a year, that deal settles down. It starts to look like a bargain from then on in. But it's not going to stay that way. Like, they're going to come back to the table, and how early they come back to the table determines basically how good a deal you got. And that's the problem that teams are dealing with here. The earlier you get ahead of it, the better, but the better the deal you end up getting increases the chances that they're coming back to the table wanting to renegotiate sooner. So it's like a catch-22 situation, right? If you let it drag on, you pay way over the odds. If you get it done super early, you may end up like undermining your own deal later on down the line.
The Brock Purdy situation that you mentioned and him being so cheap, it'll show up as we get through some of these other position groups. Like, let's go to running back. Christian McCaffrey, the highest paid running back at $19 million per year. Those are the ones that stand out to me. As McCaffrey at 19, number 2 is Alvin Kamara at 15 per year, and then number 10, jump to number 10, Tony Pollard is just 7.3 million per year. So there's a big disparity between number 1 and number 10 at running back. But again, the 49ers sitting on this Mr. Irrelevant contract of Brock Purdy, and the value that Christian McCaffrey brings as a do-it-all running back, one of the better ones in probably in NFL history, they're able to maybe overpay for at least a couple of years here.
Yeah, and you're seeing it with the Brandon Ayuk contract as well. Like, the 49ers can make that happen, even with planning for a Brock Purdy contract coming down the pipeline. They have flexibility at the moment. And you're sort of seeing that with the distribution of how much of the salary cap is chewed up by some of these contracts. Christian McCaffrey there is the top paid running back, a genuine outlier deal at this point, is still only taking up 7.5% of the salary cap right now, which is, it's significant, but it's not crazy. Meanwhile, the number 10 running back, Tony Pollard's deal, that's only 2.9% of your salary cap. Like, so, for example, Pollard, not necessarily a great example because he's coming off a relative down year. He sort of lost a lot of his luster. But Derrick Henry could still easily be running back number 1 this year. Like, he could be the best running back in football. He could lead the league in rushing. He could put up crazy numbers in that Baltimore offense. Derrick Henry at $8 million a year is 3% of your salary cap. For 3%, you could end up getting the best running back in football, like a genuine difference maker, a guy that changes the dynamic in January where you've had struggles. Like, there's a lot of sort of potential wins to be had, even in this world where, the running back alone is not going to make it happen. The offensive line needs to be in situ. The pass game needs to be strong. Lamar Jackson needs to be there already. But adding Derrick Henry as a potential value add for, quote unquote, just 3% of your salary cap is the math that's being done here.
Completely agree on Derrick Henry, and that, $8 million doesn't seem crazy for Henry and what he could bring to the table, especially in a Ravens offense that is going to want to run the ball quite a bit. I think on the other side of that, though, is Alvin Kamara being number 2,
right? As
far as, value goes. The first 4 years of his career were far better than the next 3. As we head into year 8 of Alvin Kamara, The first 4 years, he was outstanding. Now, does that coincide with having Drew Brees, and Brees is taking advantage of his receiving ability? Absolutely. But he hasn't looked like the same player the last couple years, right? And it's also coincided with a little bit more workload, right? I mean, early in his career, snap count wise, it's not a massive difference, but it did feel like it was him and Mark Ingram, and they're playing different roles, and you're playing to Kamara's strengths, and he was an absolute playmaker, especially in the pass game. But he hasn't been the same player these last couple seasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think numbers 2, 3, and 4, Alvin Kamara, Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, I think these are 3 running backs that we have seen the dependency of the running back position on the environment around them and how much that can make an impact. I mean, we saw it with Derrick Henry as well, in an extreme example where the Titans' offensive line became the worst in the league. But those 3 guys in particular, I think it's an entirely fair question to sort of say, all right, in 2024, have Alvin Kamara, Jonathan Taylor, and Saquon Barkley, have any of those guys declined or gotten worse, or has simply the environment around them fluctuated from good to bad and vice versa? That's the thing with running backs. I think it becomes very difficult to actually identify when is the drop-off happening, because it does tend to happen earlier than other positions, but when is it real, and when is it simply like our offensive line is worse than it used to be, or we no longer have Drew Brees in the backfield, or, these things.
PFF NFL podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. In today's hectic world, it's easy to focus on everything except yourself and your own mental health. But sometimes you need a little help to make sure that stays on track as well. Therapy can be really useful to get a better understanding of how your mind actually works and to become more aware of your own patterns of behavior and how to improve them. It's useful for everybody, not just people struggling with something specific. This is really important. We're excited to be able to partner with BetterHelp here. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. So it's a convenient, flexible, entirely online way to get the therapy that's right for you. This is BetterHelp. Go check it out. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And at some point, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. You never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/PFF. You do that today, you get 10% off your first month. Really great deal here. That's help, HELP.com/PFF. BetterHelp, 10% off your first month. betterhelp.com/PFF.
Yeah, I think BetterHelp being all online is a huge thing. Like having to go through the process of finding a therapist in your area, actually getting out of the house, going to see them, driving somewhere, versus simply the whole thing's online. You can do it without leaving your computer or your phone, and then the appointments could be online as well. The whole thing, I think, is perfectly tailored for 2024.
BetterHelp.com/PFF, 10% off your first month. All right, Sam, off to wide receivers here where the numbers are getting crazy. The most $20 million players at any position other than quarterback. Justin Jefferson, number 1 at $35 million per year, all the way down to number 10, Nico Collins at $24.3 million per year. Where did Tyreek end up? Does that need to be updated? Did he just jump up
he's
to
there,
35?
Number 4. He's up to 30 now, right? Because his deal was 20 something.
Oh, he's up to 30. Okay, yeah. He's 4th there. I mean, I feel like all these guys are worth it. They're all worth it.
Well, again, so wide receiver is theoretically the second most valuable position in football, right? And there's a big gap between number 2 and number 1, whereas number 2, 3, and 4 are probably quite close together. But I think there's a strong case to be made that wide receiver is the second most valuable position in the NFL. The league appears to be going in that direction as well and recognizing that and saying, look, if QB is the most valuable, the guy he's throwing the ball to is the second most, so let's pay those guys. But we're still not giving them crazy allocations of salary cap, right? Justin Jefferson's deal, $35 million a year. That's 13.7% of the salary cap, which, okay, it's a significant chunk, but it's fine, right? And the Nico Collins there at number 10, that's less than 10% of your cap. So 10% of your cap allocated to a genuine difference maker, number 1 receiver, and the second most valuable position in football makes perfect sense.
Howie Roseman and the Eagles still working their magic with A.J. Brown making 32 and Devontae Smith making 25, both in the top 10, and they're doing it with Jalen Hurts, not on a rookie contract, but on what looks like now a reasonable quarterback contract. Right. So that is a pretty solid way to be able to build the squad to make sure that Hurts has those weapons intact for him.
Absolutely, yeah. You might be noticing, by the way, that the sinking chair is happening again. I'm slowly.
Oh, is it?
Slowly, shrinking as we go through the shot. Never mind. Carry on.
Doesn't help that my Zoom makes me look like a monster again compared to you.
I mean, I don't think that's what's making that happen.
Let's go to offensive tackle. Tristan Wirfs and Penei Sewell just got paid this offseason over $28 million per year. Again, well deserved. I look at this tackle list and I think most guys, looking like the right people. It's the right people getting paid. I think it's interesting to see the Lions with 2, just like the Eagles have 2 receivers. Lions with Penei Sewell at 28, and then Taylor Decker at $20 million per year. Both guys re-upped this offseason.
Yeah, and you look through the list, and generally speaking, it's the right kind of guys. Now, the bottom of the top 10 gets kind of interesting because look, Tristan Wirfs, Penei Sewell, Darisaw, Tunsil, Andrew Thomas, Trent Williams, Jordan Mailata. These are all top-tier offensive tackles who should absolutely be in the top 10. Then we get to Deion Dawkins, Jawan Taylor, and Taylor Decker. Generally, I think there's a significant drop between the top group and this group. And Jawan Taylor in particular, I mean, he was not good last year at all, let alone one-dimensional, which is what he'd been before he got to Kansas City. So, yeah, it's interesting that we kind of run out of top-tier players by the time we get to the bottom end of the top 10.
Did I skip tight end?
Yeah, but we can,
Looks like I did.
Circle back.
Because what I noticed is, so Trent Williams is in there for offensive tackle, 49ers. Going back to tight end, George Kittle's the number 3 highest paid tight end. McCaffrey's the highest paid running back. We'll get to Nick Bosa and edge rushers. The Niners are everywhere here because they do have so many elite players.
One point I wanted to make just before we sort of dive into the rest of the positions. Again, we were talking big picture where you want the money allocated on your roster. And we've sort of said this before. You've got 5 positions maybe where you can throw around big money before you sort of run out of space and everyone else needs to be cheap. And you sort of like, where do you want the money? Well, you want most of it with the quarterback. You want probably the second most with the receiver. And then it's basically everything to do with the pass game, right? So the guy throwing the ball, the guy catching the ball, the guy protecting the guy throwing the ball, i.e. offensive tackle, then the guy trying to stop the pass, so the pass rusher and the shutdown corner. Now, when you look at where the money is, most of those positions are at the high end of this, right? It's receiver is the second best paid position now in the NFL. Then it's the 2 pass rushers, whether it's interior or edge rusher. Let's call them just both pass rushers for the sake of ease. It's the number 1 pass rusher. Offensive tackle is right up there as well. The one position that hasn't caught up yet, though, is corner. And they are still wildly underpaid relative to this world of they are directly connected to this passing game production. The number 1 guy trying to stop the pass, the shutdown corner. I'm curious why that lag has happened, or if it's simply a case of like names, right? We just haven't had a few corners hit the market yet. Like Sauce Gardner immediately resets that whenever his deal comes up, and he presumably does push towards $30 million a year and those kinds of things.
Well, let's jump right to that. I think the defensive tackle and cornerback. Let's look at cornerback first. I think both of those markets are interesting, and I'm going to repeat my theory on that. My theory, so I think there's a school of thought that says the NFL is changing how they play defense. They're playing more zone. They're playing more too high. When you play more too high, you need better bodies up front to play the run. Therefore, defensive tackles are more valuable than ever. And when you're playing more off coverage, quarters, cover 2, that 2-4-6 scheme, your quarterbacks are inherently less valuable. They're not playing as much man coverage. You're relying on your linebackers and safeties in coverage as much as your corners. So the corner market, only having Jair Alexander number 1 at $21 million, they only have 3 guys over 20. So that's the NFL scheme theory on why the market is maybe suppressed a little bit at corner relative to where it was and relative to other positions. My question is, who on this cornerback list deserves $25 million a year? Who deserves, that to be the highest paid corner in the NFL? I don't think it's clear. And part of it goes to what we always talk about, Sam. If you use PFF data and coverage stats, or anyone's coverage stats really, they fluctuate. Cornerback production fluctuates. Jair Alexander has had shutdown years. He's had other years where he's gotten beaten. Denzel Ward, same thing. Jalen Ramsey's been the most consistent, but he's getting a little bit older. Marlon Humphrey, Marshawn Lattimore, similar. There's just some inconsistency. So you're paying corner for this theoretical level of play, but the results don't always match what you're paying them. And maybe they are asking a little bit less of corners in today's NFL than they did previously. But when you mentioned Sauce Gardner, and I'll throw Patrick Surtain in there, and maybe Devin Witherspoon in a couple of years. I mean, I feel like the next wave of corners are just better, and that eventually they're going. Sauce Gardner is going to be making 25 plus or whatever the market is at that point. He's going to reset it, or at least he should, pretty soon.
I think we're missing Jalen Johnson from this list, by the way.
He should be
signed, but I think he's at 19 a year, so he's kind of at the top end of that market. The question I was going to ask, though, if you throw out that top 10 again and you look at the list, how many of those guys are coming off a good year? Like, I think the volatility that we talk about all the time at cornerback is a big part of this. If you get an offensive tackle or a wide receiver or whatever, you can be pretty confident that the next year he's going to be just as good as he was the previous year. But Jair Alexander signed a top-of-the-market cornerback deal, and he hasn't backed that up yet. Jalen Ramsey, same kind of thing. Like, he's been an elite top-of-the-market cornerback, but not necessarily last year. Denzel Ward, Marlon Humphrey. Like, a lot of these guys are not coming off a great year, and I think that inherent volatility is maybe scaring teams a little bit. And I think you're right that it's just who's around and who's signing is a big part of it, and maybe the next wave bumps this money up. But I do wonder if that volatility in coverage as a concept is why generally defensive backs have lagged behind these other positions that are all connected to the pass game.
Let's go to the other part that I was talking about, interior defensive line, because my theory is kind of inverted here. The market looks crazy now, right? I mean, it's high.
Right.
Chris Jones over 30 million a year, 31.8. The top 10, goes all the way down to 21.5 million for Leonard Williams, but Christian Wilkins just re-signed his big deal, and Justin Madubuike just re-signed. Derek Brown just signed for his 24 million a year. But look at the class of 2019 here. You got Dexter Lawrence, you have Jeffrey Simmons, you have Quinnen Williams, Ed Oliver's just outside the top here, and then Wilkins was class of 2019. So 4 out of 10 all drafted the same year, 2019. And so to me, this market has, soared because of the timing, because all these guys hit year 5 around the same time. And if you go back to the last 4 or 5 years in the draft, or since the class of 2019, there's not a lot of elite interior pass rushers, interior defensive linemen that have entered the league that are due to get paid over the next 2 or 3 years. So I think it's an interesting time where this market is really high, and the trickle down is you're like pretty good run stopping nose tackles are making $8, $10, $12 million a year. And to me, that's not great value relative to paying a corner that you can trust or whatever it might be, some other positions.
And what's interesting is even some of those kind of run stuffing style defensive tackles are still getting paid. Like, 2 guys on that list are Derek Brown and Daron Payne, and neither one of those guys is a good pass rusher. Now, they're good for nose tackles, but Derek Brown has never had more than 41 pressures in a single season. That was his most recent year, a career year for him. Never had a PFF pass rushing grade above 78.1. Even if we never do this, right? Sacks are a bad way of measuring it, but he's never had more than 3 sacks in a season. Like, Derek Brown consistently has not been a top-tier pass rusher, and yet he's been paid like a top-tier interior presence, or like the top-tier interior pass rushers. So defensive tackle is the one position where, like, elite-level run play is still getting you paid.
All right, let's go to edge rusher here, where, again, the Niners, front and center, Nick Bosa at $34 million per year. Number 2 is Josh Hines-Allen. That's Josh Allen of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now Josh Hines-Allen, number 2 at $28.3 million. Brian Burns is up there at over 28. TJ Watt at 28, all the way down to Bradley Chubb is number 10 at $22 million per year, right? I mean, this starts now, the interior defensive linemen are starting to look comparable to the edge rushers as far as the market goes.
Yeah, and gives you an indication of where Micah Parsons is going to be putting himself and why those negotiations in Dallas are tricky, because we're looking at 3 players there. I mean, obviously Dak Prescott, completely different world, maybe $60 million a year, but like CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons, their numbers both want to start with a 3, right? Like, they want to be the best paid, effectively, wide receiver and edge rusher in the NFL, or very close to it. So each one of those guys is looking at a deal not just north of $20 million, but north of 30.
You can make a case for both CeeDee Lamb or Micah Parsons. CD making 34, 35, right at the top of the receiver market. or Parsons making 34, 35 atop of the edge rusher market. And again, with Dak Prescott being the next guy up for the last 2 years, really, if he was the next guy up, it probably is, high fives or into the sixes. So that's why the Cowboys keep putting themselves into a predicament if they want to have any kind of cap flexibility over the next few years and still keep their elite players. But yeah, this edge rush group makes you look at a guy like Max Crosby making $23.5 million per year. That's a huge difference from Bosa at 34.
Right.
But Crosby's well worth it at 23.5. And the interesting thing about the cap flew up this offseason, and we know, the cap's going to go up, it's going to continue to rise. This position starting to look similar to quarterback, where like Myles Garrett at $25 million a year looks like an absolute steal for what he's bringing to the table.
Yeah, I mean, those guys are almost $10 million a year off the top of the market. That's a bargain.
Linebacker, another. Let me go back to guard really quickly. I skipped guard, but man, the market's gone high here. Landon Dickerson, Chris Lindstrom, and Robert Hunt, Quentin Nelson, all over $20 million per year. There was never, guards were always the afterthought. They were like running backs and safeties. But you're starting to see teams not only invest in guard, but certain teams like the Rams invest in two, with Jonah Jackson and Kevin Dotson both making the top 10. A team like the Panthers bringing in Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis. Lewis isn't in the top 10, but he's getting paid pretty well. A lot of teams going back to saying, hey, we need to be stout on the interior, which coincides with teams paying defensive tackles a lot more money the last few years as well.
So is this one a supply issue, a scarcity issue? It feels like there aren't that many high-quality interior offensive lines, so those guys are getting paid when they hit free agency, or even to stop them hitting free agency, simply because we're not able to replace these guys like a conveyor belt.
I think it is. Look at Joe Thuney at number 9. When he signed with the Chiefs a couple years ago for $16 million, remember, that was a pretty extreme deal at the time. It's like, wow, they're really going crazy at guard. He was the highest paid guard just 3 years ago. Now he's number 9. So this has accelerated. I do think it's a bit of a scarcity issue. I think it's a little different than corner, where it's easy to identify the names like Zach Martin, Quentin Nelson, even though maybe he's regressed a little bit. Chris Lindstrom. It's easy to say, okay, these are the top guys. Let's just pay them and lock them up. So yeah, I do believe there's something to, as we've said, you want to creep back to an average, but like there's not a lot of just good guards out there to believe in and put out there as starters.
Right.
Linebacker and safety. We'll wrap it up with these two. Linebacker, big disparity between the top few. In number 10, number 1 is Roquan Smith at 20, Fred Warner at 19. I think it's tough to argue the value of both of those guys. Roquan's really become a weapon for the Ravens since being traded there. Fred Warner, I think everybody's got him as the number 1. Again, the Niners with another top paid player at their respective positions. Tremaine Edmonds being number 3 on the list is an interesting one at $18 million per year, and all the way down to the 10. Number 10 is Logan Wilson at 9. So this is another one where there's a big disparity between number 1 and number 10.
Yeah, and it looks a lot like running back, really. The top end of this market, you're dealing with 7.8% of your salary cap, whereas if you get even just to the outside of the top 10, it's down to 3.5%. And that makes sense, right? Like we've said before, if you find a Fred Warner, if you find a genuine difference maker as an off-the-ball linebacker, that guy is worth a lot. And he definitely moves the needle, and you should try and keep him. But there aren't many of those guys. And I think even within those, even at the top of the market, you can see guys that don't fall into that category, right? Teams maybe thought they did, and that's why they got the money, but they don't. And not to dump over Tremaine Edmonds, but he's the obvious name there. Like, maybe the Bears thought that he fit into that category of genuine difference maker at linebacker, and he isn't. Like, he might not be the best linebacker in his own defense. He's definitely more athletic and more, maybe you can ask him to do more things than you can with TJ Edwards, but what they're asked to do, I think Edwards is a better player. So is Edmonds worth the $18 million a year versus trying to find somebody else for $8 million? I would say no.
All right, let's go to safety, because the safety market's been fascinating this offseason. So many veterans were brought back for cheap money. Antoine Winfield reset the market for to go over $20 million. He's at $21 million per year. Derwin James, I said it, $19 million per year at number 2, all the way down to Grant Delpit, number 10 at $12 million. Again, there's a a bit of a disparity between 1 and 10. And then if you look at guys like Justin Simmons, who's still a productive player, man, being out there and available and, making his rounds to try to sign somewhere, it's interesting the teams that have chosen to pay safeties with, I think specific things in mind, like Xavier McKinney going to the Packers, number 4 highest AAV, to play free safety in their specific scheme. But then you have other veteran safeties out there that I think could still play for pennies on the dollar compared to some of these top contracts.
I find it interesting that the safety market and the cornerback market looks very, very similar. And yet, personally, I think corner, like a top-tier corner, is a significantly more valuable spot than a top-tier safety. So, the top of the market for each, the highest paid contract for a corner is 7.8% of your salary cap. For a safety, it's 8.2%. And then the 10th best contract for a corner is 5.3%. And the 10th best contract for a safety is 4.7. So effectively, it's the same kind of range, right, for that top 10 at each position. But I think corner is a much more valuable position. So again, is that the volatility? Is it just the names that have signed and cornerback market is about to correct itself over the next couple of years? It just seems interesting to me right now that they're in the same place financially, really, but I don't think they make the same difference on the field.
I think part of what's happening here is all the money's going to the defensive line, which is the easiest thing to measure and the easiest thing to feel good about paying for. And then in the back 7, linebacker, corner, and safety, we've used the term weak link system as far as coverage units. Teams are looking at linebacker, corner, and safety as a unit that you can't have a corner that gets picked on. You can't have a safety that's always out of position. So it's more of, I think, looking at the back 7 as a unit and not a top-heavy, go get this one player. It's more, disperse your resources so you're good in the back 7 without weak links. Creep back to an average. In coverage. Fun show, Sam. I like talking about, market stuff, Judon, JJ McCarthy. Just to remind you here, we'll be back Monday morning reviewing all the preseason week 2 action, and then Wednesday, our going away show from PFF will pay respects to those who have paved the way and thank the fans and have a nice little send-off next Wednesday.
Yeah, a couple more shows left. So keep tuning into this. Keep tuning into the PFF NFL podcast or show after we are gone as well. But also come find us on our new show at Check the Mic, whether it's YouTube, whether it's our RSS feed. You can find all the links at my pinned tweet at PFF_Sam.
We have to keep saying it, though, right? Because it takes a while for people to go click a button, right? It takes a while to, click the subscribe on YouTube or go subscribe where you listen to your podcast. So just do it now. Get it out of the way, and all the fun content will be coming your way August 22nd on Check the Mic. Good?
Yep.
I'm off to practice. Going to go check out Seahawks and Titans right now. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again on Monday with more PFF NFL Podcast.